The cardinal truth emerging from these inquiries is that of the extreme isolation of the solar system. A skiff in the midst of a vast unfurrowed ocean is not more utterly alone.
The Interplanetary Podcast. The exploration of space for the benefit of all mankind. Your hosts here in London, Matthew Russell and Jamie Franklin.
Do. Oh yeah, baby, Agnes.
Agnes Mary Clark, the astronomer and writer of the Victorian era.
That is a hell of a quote, isn't it? We both love that last line, don't we?
That is, it's beautiful. She's got plenty-o quote.
I love that word, skiff. Do you think that maybe that could be my new nickname?
Yeah.
Oi, Skiffy, buy us a pint. I'd love that.
Yeah, well, you are a skiff in the midst of Brighton.
Nah, people know me here. I'm more of a ocean liner. Oh dear. So Matt, straight off the bat, we have a very exciting happy birthday, don't we?
Happy birthday, Monsieur Buzzicus Aldrinicus. That's his Latin name.
It's only Buzz's birthday. Happy birthday, the one and only Buzz Aldrin.
89th birthday.
89. Damn.
Also, yeah, the day after, on January the 21st, remember when we spoke about Miss Sam on podcast 52?
I do.
The little female rhesus monkey blasted into space by little Joe 1B.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, that's
Poor
the
little
anniversary
thing.
of that.
Let's not talk about our animals in space one. I still get nightmares of that episode.
And of course, it's and on the same day, it's the year anniversary since New Zealand had its first orbital launch and Rocket Lab had its first launch with an electric pump-fed engine and released the glorious Humanity Star.
Brilliant scenes.
Which re-entered the Earth's atmosphere in March.
Thank you, one and all.
That doesn't seem like a year ago, does it?
Really doesn't.
Since I was moaning about Humanity Star spinning around up in the atmosphere.
Oh, I know. But you know what I'm going to say, Matt? I'm going to say New Zealand is great.
I've never been, but I've
never been. You know what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to wangle a free trip to New Zealand. I mean, if anyone in the New Zealand space industry is listening, maybe you want us to go over and, do some interviews.
Well, maybe we should email Bob Richards and see if he can invite us down to watch the Moon Express launch on the
now
Electron
you're talking.
rocket. That would be really cool, wouldn't it?
I mean, not only would that be cool, I've also heard that their pies are very tasty. Apparently, Matt, you can stop and get some petrol from the local petrol stations, and they serve these pies, not like the junk food we have here, but proper pies.
Do their pies ever go into space?
Yeah, that's a good question.
There's been some pretty amazing news stories this week.
Well, go on.
And let's face it, we are quite excited about the interview that we have today.
We are very excited. So
we won't bother on too much because we unbelievably enjoyed the interview that we did with Helen
I'm
Sharman.
hoping that she might become a regular guest.
That was the most exciting thing at the end, wasn't it?
Couldn't believe it. She said, do you want me to come back and do this again? And so we were blown away. So, yeah, please do not adjust your sets. Keep listening.
Keep listening. And if you've got any questions, there's a very good chance that we can pose those questions to Britain's first astronaut.
Just ask us and we can pass it on. It's the kind of power we've got, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, it is. And with great power comes great responsibility.
It really does. So let's not muck up. Now, Matt, that phrase that you just said sounds like something that might be in this comedy that we've read about on Netflix coming soon with Steve Carell from the American version of The Office and Anchorman, etc. Going to be in Space Force. Now, this I can't wait to see.
It's by a lot of the people from The Office. The American Office are in it, and I love The American Office. It is really
great.
Good.
It's not as good as the English one, but it's great.
It is great. It's different.
It is different.
But the UK Office is perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, Steve Carell, this might be the highest paid actor of any TV series. So that obviously it's not going to be a rubbish comedy. So Space Force.
Well, I hope it comes soon now that they've teased us with it. But what a fantastic Mickey take for President Trump. Okay.
And I'm assuming the premise is kind of no one really knows what they're doing because they're not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing.
Of course.
Because it's a kind of whim of Trump.
Yeah.
I quite like that as a book title, The Whim of Trump.
The Whim. Yeah. I could think of a different title, but I won't say it.
There's been a very interesting poll that ESA released this week. Europeans have been quizzed, 5,000 of them, from UK, France, Germany, Italy and Spain, the most populous parts of Europe.
Yes.
5,000 people have been quizzed about what they thought about space. And here are some of the results. Most people agreed that the important uses of space are a better understanding of the universe,
nice.
Earth observation to keep track of climate change and stuff, and to help the utility of life, with helping with transport and communications and things like that.
Well, that's
mobile
good to
phones
hear.
and GPS. But they had doubts about the effectiveness of using space for space safety, warding off asteroids and stuff. But they thought it was still very important.
Right.
ESA were very disappointed with this one. Only 4 out of 10 of the people asked felt well informed about European space activities.
Oh.
There's a pretty easy cure for that one.
There is. Can you recommend a podcast that they can listen to, Matt, weekly?
They should listen to the Interplanetary podcast.
I tell you
weekly, putting the ace back into space.
They would get all the information and various ramblings that they needed to know.
So, 83% knew about ESA, but only 37% of people knew really what it was.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a shame. I mean, there's still a job to be done in our major news sources. BBC's definitely got better. It seems like every week there's a space, story on the front page of the website. But it could be better.
Yeah, ESA themselves have only recently started to blow their trumpet.
Yeah.
Like the NASA website is really, really brilliant.
it's
and of course, you see people walking around in NASA merch all the time in your coffee shop, everywhere.
You do.
And you think, and that's in Europe. Everyone in Europe is wearing NASA merch rather than ESA merch.
We've got some ESA merch, including
we definitely have ESA
Matt's
merch.
still very jealous that when we went to ESA, that he didn't and I did buy an ESA umbrella.
You've got that wrong. I have an ESA umbrella, and I walk around Guildford with it all the time.
Oh,
we both bought one. Yeah.
Oh, wait, hang on a minute. You know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of the anoraks.
Yeah, I bought an ESA anorak as well.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh.
We both bought an ESA anorak and an ESA umbrella.
Matt,
there might have been something.
I'm so sorry.
You're forgetting that I've got ESA.
Wait. It must have been
space transportation caps.
Maybe it was the toilet roll.
It might have been.
Yeah, it was the toilet roll.
I've actually caught myself wearing far too much ESA merch.
Definitely look like a spy.
It's like wearing double denim. I had double ESA on.
Don't knock double denim, the Canadian tuxedo. I love that. Yeah. The first gig I went to at Wembley Arena, Matt, going slightly off topic, was Bryan Adams.
And everyone was double denim.
He was wearing triple denim.
What, denim waistcoat?
No, denim shirt, denim trousers, and denim jacket. And I thought, you know what? If the Groover from Vancouver can do it, so can I.
And you have ever since.
I mean, I've never kissed a girl, but I haven't looked back.
It's like you got a little bit bored of my article there, Jamie.
No, I'm sorry. Let's go back to it. It was really interesting.
No. Well, the upshot was I find this interesting that when you ask people how much do you reckon per head space is costing a European citizen, if they have a guess, they sort of go with, well, it costs per person £200 each a year. Right, that's what they reckon. But it's actually closer to £9 a year.
Yeah, that's insane. The value.
That's good value, isn't it?
Very good.
£9 a year.
You know what? I'd give 10. I'd give £10 per year.
Well, it's more like €10. We used to be giving like £7.50.
Yeah.
But thanks to Brexit, it's not so great anymore.
Anyway, let's not talk about that.
Right, no, let's move on. 90%, unlike Brexit, 90% were very positive about space activities and Europe's involvement in it.
Well, that's great to hear. The future's bright.
I would like to see more of those sort of questionnaires, see where the podcast fits in.
Agreed.
Maybe we should do one of our own.
Oh, I think we should. What are we waiting for?
Now, you would think it was all going rosy in SpaceX, wouldn't you?
Uh-oh, what's happened?
Oh, well, after having a superb year of launches, everything going right, we've got the Crew Dragon launches coming up, and everything just seems really good. However, they've shed 10% of the talented and hard-working members of its team. I paraphrase Gwen Shotwell there.
10%. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Do we know what that is in numbers?
Oh, I don't know. Have they got like something like 7,000 people? So
Yeah,
it's quite a lot, isn't it?
We'll have to find out. But yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah, so it looks like there's going to be a sort of slowdown this year of satellite launches. But also it could be, I suppose, something to do with things like Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. There's not so much development on those.
I was going to say, I mean, they seem to have done so much that maybe Musk has just gone, you know what? We just need to strip it back to 2 or 3 things that we can excel at. Don't need to do 500 launches a year, you know?
Well, I guess they need to do the launches. I just think that there just aren't as many things needing to go up this year.
Yeah.
So it's just a slowdown. It's like, God, they're chomping at the bit to do the launches.
They really are.
Hey, not that I can see much competition for Falcon 9 arriving too soon. Worse still is for this other company called Tethers Unlimited.
Oh, yeah, I read about that one. That's 20%, isn't it?
Yeah, 20% of their staff. And the worst thing about that one, they're blaming this government shutdown.
Is it still shut down?
Yeah, it's still shut down.
Ridiculous.
All arguing over a border wall. And it means, that no one's getting paid. So this company, apparently it's all down to cash flow because NASA are unable to pay them for all their things like their CubeSat thrusters and stuff like that. And as a result, they're having to lay off staff. Isn't that
I'm not
bad?
happy about it. I'm going to write a letter.
Yeah, you should do. Write to your MP.
So, Matt,
they have absolutely no jurisdiction.
Well, they don't. But I would like to know, Matt, what's happening in the world of space telescopes?
Oh, it's been space telescope madness in the last week and a half.
Talk to me.
There was a bit of a wobble with Hubble.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, there's a camera on board called the Wide Field Camera 3.
Oh, yeah.
That was fitted about a decade ago. It was running along quite happily, and then suddenly the software went, whoa, what are all these odd voltages? And stuck itself into safe mode.
Oh.
The good news is it seems that the engineers are working a little workaround, and they're pretty confident they're going to get it online if they haven't already. So the old girl keeps going.
Well, good luck, team.
Which is spectacular. However, on the Russian front, and this is really bad, really, they've got a space telescope called Spectre.
Okay.
Which flies about 700 times higher than Hubble. It's a different type of telescope. Yeah, it measures radio sources. It's a different type of telescope, but it looks like they've lost control of the actual satellite itself. The instruments, I think, were still working.
All we hear is radio sources.
Radio sausage. Don't know where you wanted to go with that.
Sorry, it just came into my head.
I tell you what's new.
Good.
Is that it's kaput. It's kaput. And the speculation is because they didn't harden the silicon for the processors. Didn't make them space radiation immune.
That isn't good.
So so the radiation has built up, damaged the satellite, and it no longer wants to communicate.
Oh dear.
Get this. This is a pretty amazing statistic. So because they've also lost their Mikhailo Limonzov satellite recently, that's it. The Russian space program has no operational space observatories.
That's unheard of.
That's pretty bad for the Ruskies.
Come on, Russia, you can do it.
Jamie, you must have loved this story when it was breaking earlier this week.
I know what you're going to say, and I did love it, and now I'm gutted. And I don't know why I didn't think about it more, because it's kind of obvious what was going to happen, isn't it?
There's a slight cruelness. There was a slight cruelness to this, wasn't it? It's like, look at our new baby. It's dead.
I know. So this is the Chang'e 4. With growing its plants and seeds on the moon. So the cotton plant that sprouted in the bio experiment aboard the Chang'e 4 didn't have a chance, Matt, as night fell and the temperatures plummeted too. Have a guess?
Minus 170?
You're bang on. You are bang on.
Yes.
And then temperatures during the day?
120?
I tell you what, you are in the know. Because it's on the nose again.
Yeah.
But so all of the bio experiments, the plants, the seeds, will decompose very slowly. They're in their sealed can. And the potatoes didn't sprout at all. The fruit flies were just couldn't hatch. It's terrible state of affairs.
What I loved was the Chinese experimenters said that fruit flies were a little bit lazy. So lazy, and that's why that lazy.
I love the idea of their mum going,
"They're a lazy animal.
It's 10 in the morning. Get up."
Like, nah, and I can't be bothered. And now they've missed their opportunity. They'll teach them to be lazy.
Lovely Jake, our mate Jake, put up on Twitter a picture, and he put moon farming. And then I was looking at the day 3, day 5, and day 9 sprouting of the seed. I was thinking, oh my god, it's actually growing.
But that's it. It's the first ever thing, the first plant ever to grow on the moon, this cotton plant, and it actually did it.
I mean,
potatoes
that is cool.
And that what was that other one that I had real problem saying was the Arabidopsis. Arabidopsis.
Yeah.
Arabidopsis, some kind of mustard seed thing, that didn't sprout, but the cotton plant did. That's pretty exciting. That is actually pretty exciting, isn't it? But they're all just...
Yeah, that it did. It's just that old problem of atmosphere, isn't it, Matt?
Mm. And, of course, there is some worry of course, biological contamination, but the Chinese assure us that it will all be trapped in the can.
Well, I believe them. So what's happening with old Delta 4?
Well, we should have that really delayed Delta 4 Heavy with the reconnaissance satellite that is essentially a Hubble telescope that points down at the ground, except vastly improved.
Noted.
But we don't know anything about it. So I was going to have the space word of the week, furlough, because it's a word I'd never heard before.
Nor have I.
But that's all you see at the moment about this shutdown of the American government. Yeah, because it means when you basically tell all your employees to go home because of the economic conditions, and that's what's happening to all the NASA employers and everyone else, a furlough. But I'm not going to have that as the space word of the week.
No.
I just thought that was...
It's
from the Dutch. Verlof, leave of absence. We're having orbital speed.
Hurrah.
Hurrah! You know and I know, and I'm sure the listeners know, that you have to get to a certain velocity so that you go into orbit, i.e. fast enough that as you fall, the curve of the Earth is falling away from you as you're falling, right?
Correct.
Yeah, if you have like a fly orbiting the Earth, the fly's weight you can pretty much ignore, and therefore it's essentially the Earth isn't moving. But in actual reality, the Earth is orbiting the fly as well. And the center of that movement will be almost at the center of the Earth, of course.
Yes.
But Jupiter and the Sun, the barycenter, is actually slightly outside of the Sun's atmosphere.
Yeah, because it's huge.
So you could consider it a binary. Earth and the Moon, it's very, very close to the surface of the Earth. So Earth and the Moon are almost a binary system, but we're not, because the barycenter is actually under the surface. But yes, for all intents and purposes, as you said, if the object doesn't have much mass compared to the body, then this barycenter is right at the center. So we can consider the speed to be relative to the body itself, rather than having to take all that into consideration, because that would be boring. Yeah.
And Matt, how many Earths could you fit inside Jupiter?
It's one of those ones I can never remember, but it's massive.
Its volume is that of about 1,321 Earths, but is only 318 times as massive.
Mm-hmm.
I love looking at these stats. Why do I love it so much, Matt?
I'm just about to hit you with a bunch of stats.
Here we go.
Right? So mean orbital speed. When people talk about orbital speed, they often are actually referring to the mean orbital speed, because only if your orbit is circular will you be traveling at the same speed all the time. If you're in an ellipse, you'll have a periapsis and a apoapsis. Periapsis means when you're nearest, and apoapsis mean when you're furthest away. So when you're getting really near, when you're thinking about it, you get really fast. You go really fast, that's your maximum speed, and when you go far away, you slow down a little bit. But if you average it all out, you get your orbital speed. So here, do you want some stats?
I love that. Give me some stats.
Okay, so the Earth is rotating at 1,040 miles per hour, right? So if you're standing on the equator, that's how fast you're traveling relative to the sort of center of the Earth.
Yes.
Right, so obviously that's not an orbit. So if I wanted to then be in orbit at the surface of the Earth, so say fly a very fast jet plane at 10 meters above the surface of the Earth, I would have to go 17,684 miles an hour.
Damn.
If you wanted to fly at the Kármán line, which is 100 kilometers or 67 miles, 62 miles up. If you wanted to be in orbit, you have to be traveling 17,547 miles an hour. So not actually that much different than being right down quite low.
Yeah.
So you have to be pelting it. And that is, of course, why it's so hard to get orbital. That's why you need an absolutely ludicrous vehicle to get orbital.
It's not easy, Matt.
The Mir space station that Helen Sharman was on board.
She did. We'll hear more about that soon.
Flew at a distance of 200 miles or thereabout above the Earth's surface. So I calculate it was travelling at about 17,254 miles an hour. So still blooming fast.
That is fast.
So the ISS is about 50 miles higher than that. So that's just over 17,000 still. Hubble, 335 miles up. That's still just under 17,000 miles an hour. But geostationary orbit's quite an interesting one. It's not that fast at all. It's only, geostationary orbit is 22,236 miles above the surface. It's so far away, isn't it?
That's
geostationary orbit. And it's has an orbital speed of only 6,878 miles an hour. So you don't have to get...
not too bad.
You have to be going... Yeah, not too bad at all. And the moon...
Here we
which
go.
Is orbiting
this is the big
Earth,
one.
Yeah, is travelling about 2,209 miles an hour relative to the barycenter of Earth.
Because it's a quarter of a million miles away, correct?
Yeah, 250,000 miles away.
Some good stats today.
Those facts are worth remembering because Helen Sharman mentions how fast you're going in Mir.
Another stat worth remembering, Matt, is when I was, I think, 7 years old... I won a bouncy castle competition where you had to do the most bounces in a minute, and I did 101 in 60 seconds.
Oh, wow.
So, I don't know what you can do with that, but please keep it.
It's worth mentioning, and we could bung in another couple of space words here.
Go on.
That virtually all of these orbits that I've just been talking about are prograde orbits, meaning that... When you start orbiting, you're orbiting in the same direction that the Earth is rotating. And the reason being, of course, it takes much less fuel because you're already going 1,040 miles an hour.
Big time.
So, yeah, it didn't take anywhere near the effort to get you up, which is why the ESA's launch facility in Kourou is so good because you're so near the equator, so you're getting that almost the full on push up into orbit.
I told you to stop mentioning Kourou. You'll make me jealous again.
So Helen Sharman,
here we go,
is the British chemist who became the first British astronaut and the first woman to visit the Mir space station in 1991, and she still remains in the top 10 youngest people ever in space.
I think it's just incredible, and what a story, and it couldn't happen to a nicer person. So here we go.
Écoutez.
The Interplanetary Podcast, putting the ace back into space.
So we're here with Helen Sharman, Britain's first astronaut, which is an absolute honour to have her here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed.
So I'm going to kick off with a question about 2019, really. We've started thinking of 2019. A lot of us have come to the conclusion that 2019 is going to be the commercial, is where commercial space is really going to come of age. Have you got any thoughts about commercial space? Because we're really excited about it. Have you got any thoughts about the economic return from commercial space as opposed to the economic return that you might get from government-funded space?
Ooh, well, wow, yes, I'm really excited about it as well, actually. I think this is really now we're right on this edge, aren't we, of making space so much more accessible for many, many people of all different types, and that includes the scientists sending up their experiments into microgravity, but for all sorts of people who just want to travel into space and they have that experience. And we are so close, and it's tantalisingly close at the moment. I think, yes, can we put numbers on it? I don't think we can really, can we, at the moment? But the good thing is it's not just one company. There's many different companies that are sort of not so much fighting each other, but they've kind of got their own bit of a niche, but nonetheless they all want to be first. So they're all gearing up, and it's great, so they can play each other off. NASA can then contract to 2 or 3 of them without knowing that they're putting all their eggs in one basket. And then that will release NASA funding and the rest of the world's space agency funding, you could argue as well, to be doing other things, other sort of the stuff that perhaps isn't quite ready for commercialisation just yet.
Are those the sort of things that you're more excited about? Because presumably you're talking about the more science aspect of space utilisation.
Yeah, science in one respect, but also the other things like landing on the other side of the moon, dare I say it, in 2019. That's the other really mega thing, isn't it? And what that leads us to. I mean, the actual moon itself, perhaps a lot of scientists have said, scientifically speaking, it's quite dull. But what that leads us to know that we can do that, and the technology, the infrastructure required to allow us to communicate with the spacecraft on the other side of the moon. I mean, that's the whole setup and the organisation, and for a country like China to do it, of course, that then the political aspect and the race is on kind of thing. And I think that's the other side of this. So commercialisation will allow NASA to then take part in what must surely be now a new space race.
Yeah, in fact, that actually does lead on to one of the questions that we had. What in your view, what are the sort of long-term potential for a truly international lunar surface expedition? So you've got Europe, US, Russia, China, possibly India as well. Not as a political question, but do you think that as a collaboration between nations, it's better than, say, a healthy competitive environment between nations?
I think you probably need a little element of both if we're really going to do it a bit quicker. And I don't honestly think while I'd love China to be involved and collaborate nicely with everybody else, I don't think that they want to do that really. I think China wants to show how it itself is capable of doing anything, and it probably will, and it will allow other countries to come on board with its programmes if we want. But I don't think that, honestly, will China really collaborate with us? Would be lovely. It would be lovely, but I think that's highly unlikely, sadly. We may well get many, many other countries. You mentioned India. They've, of course, long been interested in space in general terms, but also satellites, and they've had an astronaut many, many years ago. So, yes, I think the collaboration, absolutely. A bit of competition will not just make it exciting, but it will sort of put the foot on the gas a little bit more, to use a very mechanical, earthbound frame of figure of speech. But I think whether we do actually need to go to the surface of the moon. I mean, I've been convinced for a few years by various people, mostly American, I have to say, that actually we don't need to go to the surface of the moon. We need to go into some sort of lunar orbit, possibly, or some other place in space, which will allow us then to get further to Mars, get humans to Mars. We don't need to actually build a lunar base. Now, we can learn lots of things on the moon, but I would argue that actually we can learn them elsewhere. Let's go and do that exciting stuff. Let's just go for it. Let's not go back to the moon, first of all, unless we absolutely have to.
Do you think that, you mentioned China earlier, do you think that they were mentioning about the amount of resources and materials that are on the moon that could potentially help with them, also mentioning solar power? Do you think that that's why everyone's saying the next boots will be Chinese boots on the moon, because they want to harvest the moon for their gain?
Wouldn't surprise me one bit. I think it's much at the moment China's just investing, and China's investing in pretty much everything. I mean, science, technology, engineering, sending its students over to the UK. Huge investment, really, in terms of financial terms. But eventually those students will be going back to China and taking with them not just the knowledge, but the understanding of perhaps a way of thinking, which has been different from the way that China has taught its students traditionally. So there's going to be, I think, give it 10, 15 years, and China will have a whole load of new academics, engineers, systems people, actually, and scientists, working in quite a different way. So yes, it wouldn't surprise me at all if China wants to put boots on the moon, not just to explore, but to actually just to go there, just to see what it can do and to show.
It's a show of force and power.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that maybe Russia will actually start leaning over towards the Chinese side in terms of who they're partnering up with in terms of lunar?
I think Russia will probably do a bit of both. So Russia's had its fingers burnt a bit by cooperating with China. So if you go around the Chinese astronaut centre, I suppose you call it, I don't know what the actual translation is. It's basically like a copy of what Star City is, but it's bigger. And the Russians will say it's bigger and it's better because it's all brand new. So pretty much, I mean, look at their spacesuits. Look at their actual spacecraft itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not direct copies, but they're so similar. So yes, Russia thought it was selling a little bit, but of course now Russia understands that this is how the Chinese have always done things. Traditionally, they will copy, and then they will do sort of incremental increases in improvement on whatever has already been done before. So that combined with the new idea of having their students and their future scientists and engineers in a more free-thinking kind of way, which they can learn from coming and studying in not just in the UK, but in the States and other countries as well, then I think China's going to be a real force to reckon with.
Yeah, I really like that idea of the paradigm shift of the way that they think, because in some ways they've got an advantage because of the way that they think. They do think very differently to us, don't they? And it's if they come over and also adopt the way that we think, it will accelerate things quite considerably in terms of their ambitions.
I mean, it has to. And I think so because of the huge investment and because of the way that their politics works in China, not that I really understand it in any depth, but they can pretty much do what they like. It's not that they have to get voted in or out of office in the next 4 or 5 years, as many Western governments do. So they can continue to fund what they want and not fund all the rest of it. And we couldn't do that in the UK, and we wouldn't want to, and wouldn't advocate it, but it does mean that there's all of that investment going ahead, I think NASA of course knew about it. We knew about that there was China had launched this mission to the other side of the moon before Christmas. I think it launched in November, didn't it? But we didn't quite know when it was going to land, and so of course we had all of this excitement about Ultima Thule from NASA coming out because they weren't quite sure and they didn't want China because landing on the far side of the moon was bound to beat whatever NASA was going to say about just they've only managed to go 9 billion miles away. Big deal. It's huge. Of course it is.
Not just that, Osiris-Rex as well. I mean, poor old Osiris-Rex engineers, they must have gone, what about our story?
It is. It sort of eclipses everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It's been quite a big start to the year if we think of what's happened in the last kind of week and a half already.
Yes, already. And yes, exactly. So may it continue.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned huge investment, and that brought me onto a question about the ISS. Obviously, it being this huge laboratory in space, and people always talk about the expense that it costs to keep it there and run it. Now, we know your background in chemistry and science experiments, obviously. What would you say to the people who question the money it costs to keep something like that going?
Well, wow. Yes, of course, it's expensive. It's providing us with more understanding about how to operate in space in future. And it's one of those things that can be turned commercially as well.
Yeah.
So actually, it's one of the good things that Trump has said, I think, is that he ultimately, not necessarily in the next year or so, but I think it is a good idea that because we're not sort of needing to do anything particularly new to get people into space. We've done that before, and we can bring them back from space. I'm not saying that it's definitely it's an easy journey for the engineers or the astronauts themselves, but relatively speaking, we're quite good at that now. Yeah. And so, that's the kind of thing that can be turned commercially and leave NASA and other space agencies to go on and do other stuff.
Incredible.
So that would lead on to something like the LOPG, the Lunar Gateway. What are your thoughts on the Lunar Gateway in terms of its ability to generate maybe science? Because I know that's a
well, yes. I mean, science will come from anything if we want it to, won't it? I mean, anything new is going to bring us science results. The question is, of course, there's a limited amount of funding, so where do you put your funds? And I think what we need is a good medium and long-term strategy that isn't everybody fighting each other. We want the space agencies who are going to collaborate to agree to collaborate, so to know where their aims are. Are we going? Is it human exploration? And maybe there should be a little bit of that. Is it all human exploration? And I would argue no, absolutely, it shouldn't be all human. That's, of course, is part of it, but we need to be doing other stuff as well. We need to be learning the science. So it's a little bit like not spreading ourselves too thinly, but equally not doing one thing only, so that we've got science coming back at us, so that we can learn, we can use the benefits of that for all sorts of different things. And we do on Earth already, and there's all sorts of you can talk about spin-offs, but scientists will say, well, if we had that amount of money that was invested in that science research in space, we could have done far more science on the Earth, and that is true. But it's different science.
Yeah.
Right. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, one question. This is a question that David sent me. He thought it'd be quite a fun one. He with Russia, obviously they're very behind with their Federation Starship, their equivalent of Orion, and so they're toying with the idea of sending people to the Lunar Gateway with a Soyuz. And your mission, of course, is a very similar duration mission to what would be a lunar mission of that type. And of course, you've been in a Soyuz. What have you got any thoughts about that kind of doing that kind of mission to lunar orbit in a Soyuz? What do you think about that?
Soyuz is reliable. I mean, it's a workhorse. It's as a rocket, but actually as a spacecraft, it's reliable. It's pretty basic. There's no hot food or water, but you could argue for a few days who needs that. We didn't. It was fine. And Soyuz can survive the journey. Perhaps need a little bit more radiation protection. We lived on Soyuz for 2 days, but only 2 days. And when I closed my eyes, I could see little bright flashes every 4 seconds or so. Wow. So I wouldn't like to live on Soyuz. Well, you need to do the sums on the radiation, but I wouldn't like to live on Soyuz for very long, let's say. So I think they might just need to have a little bit more radiation protection. That would certainly make astronauts feel a bit more comfortable about what they were subjecting themselves to. But otherwise, and practically, it's quite a reasonable, if a little bit cramped, place to be. You've got the orbital module as well as your sort of the bit where you actually sit in. So there's room for 3 of you at a time to pretty much stretch out, as long as you don't mind your feet going down through the hatch. So for a few daid it's no problem. Yeah.
So it would be a sort of feasible development in the.
They need to make sure that they put it on the right kind of rocket, of course, to get it there. And but the actual spacecraft itself, it's quite a friendly little spacecraft, I suppose. It's compact. You can pretty much reach everything around you. It has its I suppose it has its quirks. So the fact that it is in 3 sections, and it's coming back to Earth where the quirks happen. So sometimes the bolts don't separate properly. You always want to make sure, of course, that you're coming in the right angle. Otherwise, you can spin, and that's been problems in the past. Ballistic entries aren't particularly pleasant, so I've heard. I've never had to sort of put up with one. But again, it helps people survive through that. So I think it was well engineered. Korolev knew what he was doing.
Yeah, absolutely did. Now, here's one for you. One thing we ask all of our guests is, what's your favourite space fact or science fact that kind of, I mean, you've obviously dealt with students a lot with your work at the college, etc., and you're touring. But is there one fact that stays with you that blows people's minds when you tell them?
Well, facts.
It's a tough one. There's a few.
Facts and quite question about.
What's an amazing fact? I mean, it depends really on where you're coming from. If you think about the speed people are travelling at, because we think of astronauts as being weightless, and we feel weightless, of course, and we feel as though we're absolutely static. We're just floating in the middle of just some great big space. But of course, it's that the speed with which we're travelling around the Earth. And when you just translate that to that 17,500 miles per hour on the Earth's surface, I think for people who aren't familiar with spaceflight and those kind of speeds. And so when I tell people, well, that means that you could basically commute to work in a second and a half or something. Yeah. And that's it. The penny starts to drop about how fast we are actually travelling, and therefore then the implications of, well, it's all right if there's nothing in front of you, but what happens if you do hit something? And then the picture I like to show actually people is a shuttle orbiter window that's been hit by a fleck of paint at orbital velocity, and you have this huge impact. And of course, the kinetic energy of a tiny fleck of paint, something with as little mass, but because it's got huge velocity, is high. And so and the damage it creates to the outside of spacecraft. I know Tim Peake will say that the outside of the ISS is just covered in pits, and I know we have problems with solar panels, the reduction in the efficacy because of the damage just by I'll say bits of stuff, and it could be micrometeoroids, it could be something that's artificial, flecks of paint and so on. I mean, junk is really big bits. If you get hit by a big bit, then you really worry. But I suppose a lot of, let's say, junk is probably travelling in the same direction that you are, so its relative speed to you was much reduced, fortunately.
Well, we saw a map of space junk, and I couldn't believe how much.
Well, I was in Darmstadt in the junk control room where they sort of monitor it, and one of the things he said was that they were a little bit concerned about when we're talking about commercial space and these constellations of satellites going up. Is that something that you would worry about in terms of if you've got a company and it goes bust and it doesn't bother, who actually looks after these 1,000 satellites that are suddenly left?
Yeah, I think it's a big problem with commercial spaceflight generally is that we need the legislation to bring, let's say, health and safety in the widest possible sense of the meaning, including what you've just mentioned about sort of constellations and satellites. But whether it's humans getting to ISS, we need to make sure that they're not going to be taking up toxic stuff in the air, in the cooling fluid that they might join onto to ISS or whatever it might be. So we need that kind of legislation to make people conform. And how do you make somebody conform when you could be some country in launching something from the middle of a jungle somewhere? How do you do that? Do we give the UN some teeth to actually police this? I mean, maybe that's how we have to do it. But that's the only way I can think of, really. But then the UN was never really set up. It was set up in more sort of a collaborative way. Well, if you would like to do it our way, that's very nice, but we can't force you. But I think we do need, now we're operating, and what we do increasingly affects the rest of the world. And we know already with our environment that what happens if you have a nuclear accident halfway around the world, within hours it's affecting our own airspace. All of the coal that's being burnt in certain countries, again, it affects everybody's airspace. Eventually, the ozone layer in Antarctica, it was Europe's and America's refrigerants. So we cannot anymore just think that we can work irresponsibly. So somehow the world has to fight that, and act up. And
yeah, so I guess in that sense, it's just a global problem rather than just a space problem. It's part of a bigger picture of global.
Did you feel like you were more aware of that? A lot of astronauts say when they come back, they're more aware of Earth as one place. That there aren't borders. You can't see the borders from that high up. Are you in that camp as well?
In a way. So, I mean, I suppose I spoke to many people before I flew, people who had flown. So I was kind of, I suppose, ready for that.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely true. You can sort of see some borders between Canada and the US, for instance, because the way that the agriculture works is quite different, bigger fields in the US. So you can kind of see some distinctions.
Yeah.
And a lot of borders actually are geographical anyway.
Yeah.
And so you kind of know where that mountain ridge is on one side is, and
But
the river often...
certainly no guards.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But no, it is very much the fact that as you orbit the Earth, of course, you go around very, very quickly. With a couple of blinks of the eye, you've gone over big cities. And so, yes, in that respect, how interconnected everything is. What amazed me actually was looking out one night and seeing lightning flashes. And it was obviously cloudy, which is typically lightning where the clouds are. So the lightning was happening within the clouds, and I could sort of see a big burst of light, and it would then illuminate a whole sort of patch of clouds. So I could sort of see the clouds sort of, if you like, it's almost like they're sort of ballooning with light, and then it would diminish. Wow. But that one flash then set off, or appeared to set off, another flash of light 200 or 300 kilometres away. So storms that we don't necessarily think are connected on Earth, and then you would get a sudden sort of brrr of lightning flashes within, almost like on a continental scale.
Wow.
And I can't believe, and that would happen sort of periodically, and then there would be a bit of a calm patch, and then brrr again. Perhaps not quite as quickly as my my tongue rolling sort of represents there, but certainly quite quick flashes of lightning, and that's again the interconnectedness of all of that.
Incredible.
We're not alone. We've got to cooperate more and more so. And we've got to be nice to each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Easy said, though.
I suppose you didn't really need to go into space to kind of have those feelings, really. I suppose.
Well, living in Russia taught me a lot, actually. So when I lived there, it was Soviet Union times, end of the Soviet Union times. Life was really hard for many people there. In fact, most people, they did not have stuff in the shops. Really, shops were empty, and it's hard for many people to even consider that. So this is well before communications of internet and mobile phones and so on. Phone calls were difficult to make. Sometimes you just couldn't, the phones weren't working for days and days on end. So there was nothing in the shops, but you couldn't make a phone call. They didn't have cars. Some people did, but it was very difficult to get hold of a car. If you did, you couldn't get hold of petrol half the time. Really, really difficult time. So what did they talk about? Well, they certainly didn't have adverts. They didn't talk about the latest computer. They have computers, but they didn't talk about the latest car or the glitzy clothes or what colour makeup they were going to be buying from the shops, anything like that. What they talked about was each other. And they really were interested in themselves as people. So individual relationships and then communities, very much so. And I learned a huge amount from that. So I just come from sort of 1980s UK. It was all very sort of broad shoulder pads and cut and thrust and thinking that I had to join. I thought I wanted at that time I was part of the rat race, and it was all very exciting. And I realised that actually that's not what life's about. So Russia taught me so much then. Now, when I now go back to Moscow, I find it very sad because they've got everything. You walk down the high street, I can't afford to shop in the shops in central Moscow. It's all designer clothes and stuff. And the sad thing is that Russia seems to have almost forgotten what it taught me. So somehow in between the two, there must be a happy medium. I'd like to think maybe we can all learn from each other a bit more.
Yeah, that is a valuable lesson.
Just going to Russia at that period, that's really interesting.
Well, one of the things do you still remember any Russian phrases? What springs to mind?
One that springs to mind relatively recently, not today, actually today while we're actually recording here, it's quite chilly outside, but quite sunny. So I would say we've got some decent weather out there, but there's a lovely Russian phrase called bez pagodi, which I probably haven't pronounced it very well, so please excuse me, any Russian speakers who are listening, but bez pagodi means without weather. So basically, there's no weather today, and that's a fairly typical thing. It's not really doing anything. It's cloudy because in the wintertime in Moscow, it's always cloudy. You don't really see the sun. It's not snowing. It's not raining. It's not that cold. It's not that warm. It's just not really doing anything. So it's like without weather. So that was always a nice one. And without weather, of course, it's exactly what happened in space. You don't get forget about solar wind and sun, but we don't actually experience weather certainly inside the spacecraft. And that's one of the things that when I got back to Earth, I realised how much I'd missed.
Yeah.
I'd missed the wind in my hair and the rain on my face. Yeah. And it was only for 8 days I'd been in space for, but still now, when I'm outside, if it rains, I haven't got a brolly, I love it. It's great just to feel that splashing and it's actually happening to me. So I think that Russian phrase "Bez pagody" is a kind of an odd one for me.
Actually, that reminds me of that lovely clip is it Interstellar, where the guy's having a hard time and someone puts some headphones on him and it's just rain. It's the sound of rain. And we went to a Mars Nation event where we were talking about mental health in space and what could you do for astronauts who maybe were missing their friends and family or missing weather. And I know that Tim Peake he was running a marathon and they said, where do you want to run? And he said the Scottish Highlands. And so they went and did the video for him and that's amazing. But I was going to ask you about that. But missing weather, that's of course a big thing.
Weather. But it isn't. And so Tim's a big marathon runner. It's while I was in space, we had videos of Russian countryside. So when we were using the exercise bike, not that I had to use the exercise bike because I was only there for a short time, but it would be, it's a nice thing. So the psychologists say it's not just a question of just helping you get through the exercise, but actually it's to see green stuff on a video. Or I actually took up a miniature lemon tree partly for an agricultural experiment, but actually also as a psychological thing. Does it actually make the astronauts feel a bit nicer, a bit more like home? Of course, the sad thing is we had so much stuff on board the Mir space station because it'd been up there for quite a while, and typical sort of engineers, scientists as well. We don't like to throw things away. It might just come in useful for something. So they got all sorts of bits of old experiments and all sorts of stuff that, of course, it's taken so much energy to get into space. You don't want to get rid of them unless you really know you're not going to need them again. Yeah. There was so little space for this poor little lemon tree that I'd got, because I'd carefully got it. One of the first things I unpacked, and I gave it to Musso, who had been up there for 6 months. Here, look, wouldn't you like to have this up? And he said, well, where am I going to put this? We'll bung it over there, out of the way somewhere. The psychologists were mortified.
This sounds a little bit like Wall-E, in that the seat where he has to sort of look after that little plant, and he's trying to find it.
But was there an element of that? Was there an element of you? Because I've got a Japanese peace lily at home and I've had it for 15 years and I talk to this thing, I'm watering, but is there an element of that where if you take a small plant into space that you want to nurture it like you would a pet, or, just it's something for you to look after, not just looking after yourself, and that must be good for mental health.
Yes, I think that's part of the psychology of it, that it's something to care for, sure. And it's not just it's not immediate. It is something that you need to spend a long time, and you almost hesitate to say it, but perhaps build a relationship with your plants.
Yeah, in
that
of course.
way. Yeah.
And have a gin and tonic if you can get some slices going on.
In your book, you mentioned that Mir felt like home to you. That you had a really strong feeling of being at like an actual home, and was that to do with the kind of enclosed space, or was it to do with the camaraderie of the people around you? What actually do you think caused that really strong attachment to it?
Partly it was that we'd learned so much about it in the training, so it's almost like like sort of seeing something in VR and then you actually get there and it's just how you expected it. So in that respect, it was all already quite well known to me when I got there. But yes, you're right, that camaraderie is lovely, and I think it's a home because of the feelings that you have in it, not because of what it's got. Yeah. And yes, I just had such a fabulous time there. The cosmonauts who were there, what I was doing, and the just doing new stuff with the experiments, looking out of the windows. If you didn't have windows, I wonder how much of a home it might have felt, because that was all part of it. It was that and sort of the experience. But yes, I just had happy times there, I suppose. So yes, it felt like a really nice place to be.
The view out the window, presumably that's the view of Earth and seeing this, because you describe it as massive. A lot of astronauts I've read describe it as tiny, but in your book you're saying how vast it is and that you felt really big. But with the the view out of the International Space Station is obviously the Earth. Will it be different for the poor old astronauts that are in orbit around the Moon on the Lunar Gateway if they go and they've just got the Moon as their view? Do you think that will make it less homely, or do you think it will be all right as a view?
No, I think it'll be much less pleasant as a view, certainly. So not only is the Moon less interesting because of its colours, but I think looking back at the Earth, it's the people that I remembered, certainly, when I was orbiting the Earth, and that's what made the Earth feel also like home. And I thought of going over countries where I know family, friends, it's those people I thought about. And I think it's that emotional connection with the planet which makes it feel so beautiful, well, partly, and there's many reasons, I think, why it sort of has this attraction to us. But it's that emotional connection with it, and the fact that it is so physically beautiful. The blues, those gorgeous blues of all the seas, the lakes around. And why do we like blue? Is it because it's that particular wavelength of light? Our eyes are more susceptible to green. But on the other hand, blue means life. Is it because we know blue means life, or somehow is blue beautiful? I personally happen to quite like the colour blue. I like blue lights. I like blue fireworks. Quite rare, of course, in fireworks. I like blue flowers. I like at the end of the day when the UV tends to overtake quite a lot of the other light, and so the blue tends to be a bit more predominant. So I quite like those blue colours. But is that just me, or do we all like blue for different reasons? But yes, it's the blues and the brilliant white clouds, so you get that reflection of sunlight back to you in space, and then of course the brown of the land, so you get those different colours. The poor old Moon's not really got a lot to offer in that respect.
No,
it's not quite as good, is it?
It can't keep up there.
Well, but on the other hand, but I'm not saying it would be amazing to look at the Moon and or keep on orbiting, because the astronauts up there were still entranced by the Moon. It was just to go back to Apollo 8, when they got that view of the Earth, suddenly, amazing. Wow, that was something even more, wasn't it?
Yeah, we got to interview Al Worden, and that was a big deal because, it's just hard to.
Well, yeah, he's done the deepest spacewalk, hasn't he? I think, or whether he still holds that, but it certainly was a pretty far out one. Yeah,
it really was.
Yeah, in fact, that actually does lead on to another question. One of our listeners wrote in and said, besides the Earth. Dave Blazers, this is besides the Earth, what is your favourite planetary body or it may not even be in the solar system, and why?
Ooh, good one. Interesting one, isn't it? I suppose it's things that we don't really know very much about, just because they're so wild. I mean, Uranus has to be sort of up there. It's we really haven't got an awful lot of information about that planet. And so I'd just like to find out more about it, I suppose. But I think they're all interesting. I like magnetism just as an interesting concept to me, from my chemical knowledge and understanding about the rotation of electrons, which is really what gives us that attraction in the first place. But then how that can be over such large distances, even when we just think about, it's just a little teeny weeny electron spinning around, and yet you get the number of electrons, and yet somehow the field can be over many meters if you have a strong magnetic, and then in space, and how the Earth's magnetic field, of course, protects us from solar radiation, and I love the idea of that as well, and how is that really taking part in other in the rest of stuff that goes on in space? What else is there that really is this, I suppose, part of this unifying theory? Is magnetism somehow up there? Are we ignoring something if we don't really include magnetism in our theories of space? So I'd like to find out much more about that. But yes, where planets have got magnetic fields, I think that makes them quite interesting.
Yeah, I suppose that makes Juno very interesting, doesn't it? Because the magnetic fields of Jupiter and might even be metallic hydrogen all swirling around in the core and stuff.
Makes it very complex.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Talking of other planets, Mars, now SpaceX obviously doing their thing. In 50 years, do you think that we will have had boots on Mars?
Oh, definitely.
And if so, what is the biggest challenge that comes with that?
Definitely, I would say within 20 years, 25, but certainly less than 30 years we'll have had boots on Mars, definitely.
Oh, right.
But the people will take risks, I think, because we're starting this new space race partly with the Chinese to thank for that. I would say.
SpaceX doesn't do it, China will.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we'll get there. And big problems with radiation at the moment, and with food. So just two, but two big ones. Radiation, I would say. Possibly, there's new materials, but a lot of what's being developed nano-wise, that might help us, but we still haven't really got anything. Do we need to let the astronauts live underground? There's all of that. But then how do we make sure that they get there safely and in a fit state in order to create that underground habitat? Can we do that for them before they get there, possibly? Right. And perhaps as we're getting better with robotics, which the Chinese are proving by landing on the other side of the moon.
More potato plants.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Can we grow food? And then there's a lot of pros. People hear different things. Is the soil toxic or is it not toxic? I'm sure we can get work around that. But we haven't managed to grow fruit and veg in space. Yeah. Now, I think it's a personal theory. I'm sure there are a lot of very interesting to hear, actually, if anybody really knows. But we've grown flowers in space, and we can make tomatoes fruit hydroponically on Earth. So we can fertilise them artificially. We can we know how to dab them with paintbrushes even manually. So we can do that. We can get the sort of nutrients to the roots, and we know that it's not relying on gravity to get that up through the plant because it's all capillary action. So tomatoes, we can manage to make as many tomatoes as we like on Earth without needing soil, and we can even provide them with artificial light, so we don't even need the sun. So why can't we grow tomatoes in space? We can grow the vegetables, we can take up potato plants and make the potatoes bigger, but we can't take up a potato plant and let it flower and create a potato root tuber from brand new. And why not? So my personal theory is that it's something to do with the way that the atmosphere, the air around the leaves actually circulates, because of course you don't get convection in space.
Right.
You get convection on Earth, which means that you've got micro sort of climates, if you like, around the leaves, but you've got this constant rotation, constant movement. And I just wonder if we're properly managing to get the ventilation to the plants so that we can actually, to the very, very surface. And we're talking here like molecules on surfaces. And I think it's that surface that perhaps we're not thinking of properly yet.
So if you're listening, Elon, that's your next challenge.
Absolutely.
Well, he actually, the very first thing he ever wanted to do was send a greenhouse to Mars, wasn't it? That was his.
But you see, on Mars there's gravity, so it might not be so much a problem. Yeah. So we might be better off on Mars, and on the Moon. Maybe that's our place to try it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wonder what the minimum gravity is. I guess
this is the thing, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, maybe we just need anything which will just give us a bit of circulation.
What's that incredible film, Silent Running?
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Not seen
Where they take the greenhouse
one,
up into space. Yeah, amazing.
It's a great sci-fi.
Really
It's one of the great sci-fi films.
It's a good one.
We got another question from one of our patrons, Bob Hodges, and he wants to know about the recent Soyuz abort. Where I'm assuming that you watched it. When you saw that Soyuz abort, did you know exactly what was happening and what the two the astronaut and the cosmonaut went through, and is it something that you trained for? And was your Soyuz configuration similar to theirs, or is there actually a difference between what you had and what they had?
All very, very similar still. So the Russians will say, it's worked before. Why invent it, reinvent it? Do you want to be the first person to try something brand new? And I was when I used to ask quite often, and of course then I would say, nope, that's fine. If it was fine for Yuri Gagarin, it's fine for me. Thank you very much. But no, seriously, it's very similar still. Yes, we trained for it. In fact, a couple of the astronauts who used exactly the same kind of abort system in 1986. 83, I'm trying to think now which one it was. So it was Strekalov, Manakov and Strekalov, I think. Perhaps not Manakov, but Strekalov. So there were two of them who did the same kind of thing, but they had to escape from a fire on the launch pad. So they came to tell me how it's fine, it works. I'm to have confidence in that. And I did have confidence that it would work if necessary. So yes, I didn't actually watch the latest one live, but I did see it a short time afterwards. And it really, you could tell that it was to do with that separation of the booster. There was something going on there. But yes, as soon as it had happened, I had reasonable confidence that they'd get back okay. Of course, their main problem was just having to hang around for a couple of hours until the rescue team arrived because they weren't quite in place. But yeah, they were fine. Ballistic landing, but again, that's happened on a number of occasions in the past, and often goes unreported because it's not such a big deal, really. People like you would know, but a lot of people doesn't get hit the main news made. So yeah, but we just don't know. But yeah, it's one of the backups, and it's there, and it's great, and we're very grateful for the fact that it's there, and we hope we'll never need to use it, but we know it'll work.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you'd have been in that situation, presumably, would the first thought going through your head not be about your safety, but oh no, this is my space mission kind of scuppered?
I think to start with, you think you're just getting on with it. You just need to you just go through the motions of what you've been trained to do, and that's why the training is really so good. So you've practiced it in the training. Instead of it being plan A, it's now plan B, and you just keep going with plan B. The thing is, with something like the landing and this particular abort, there's not a lot you've got to do. It's not like you're firing retro rockets and you've got to do calculations. You've just got to brace yourself. So presumably, as soon as they that they knew what was happening, and I think they worked it out pretty quickly when they realised that they were feeling weightless and they shouldn't have done, and it was they were then just knowing that they just have to watch out for the brace. But yes, all that would be going through their mind was just making sure that they're attentive for bracing themselves. They'll be starting to feel a bit disappointed, I would imagine, before that the actual impact on the ground happens, and before the parachutes open. But actually, it was all over very, very quickly for them. So the parachutes open, and you get this huge sort of swing from side to side, and the side G is quite a shock, actually. And I knew what it was supposed to be, but feeling that sort of that swing from side to side, and it's a jolt really to start with as well. Is quite a big thing. And then when you actually land on the ground, and you tend to tumble and bounce a bit, because you're strapped into your seat, so you don't move out of your seat. That's fine, but your head isn't strapped into the back of your helmet. So I think typically astronauts tend to get bruised because the microphones get jammed up between our faces and the front of the helmet, so you just get a bit of bruising in your lips. And I think the same thing happened to the astronauts that landed. But amazingly, that's pretty much all that happened. A bit battered, a bit bruised, but they stood up, they're fine, they walked, and they're healthy.
Not bad considering.
Did you have that simulated, that swinging thing?
No, you don't get the physical simulation. So that's the thing that you can't simulate on Earth is the physical side. You've got the centrifuge, I suppose, to simulate G generally, but you don't get the increased G, then bang, stopped, and the noises and the vibrations and all of that as well. So you can't actually simulate the actual.
They leave that as a surprise for you.
It's
How nice of them. So here's one that's slightly different from my niece Poppy. She said, "Are you still making ice cream? And if so, what flavour?"
I'd love to make ice cream. I should have another go at that. I love mint. I love mint ice cream. So yes, if I had another go, I'd make it. Yeah. But yes, if you're a big ice cream factory, you tend not to do mint much unless you're only doing mint, because mint gets everywhere. So yes, mint tends to flavour other things. So yes, that's just a hint. If you have any mint chocolates at home, keep them away from your other chocolates, because they do tend to make them all flavoured a bit of mint.
Okay, there we go.
But yes, but Poppy, if I was, I'd love to know, Poppy, what you would like to make if you were making ice cream. But chocolate's always a good favourite as well. I think it's a nice one. Yes, but so yeah, I've really enjoyed making ice cream, because when you think about how ice cream, what it is actually, so you've got all this lovely mixture of things, and when you freeze anything, when you freeze water, of course you get ice, and when you freeze something that water is mixed in with, then the water crystals freeze. If you keep on churning it, we say in the ice cream parlance, so you keep on sort of turning it, then those crystals are small, so that you don't taste them, they don't taste rough. But it does mean then that the rest of the mixture has to freeze at a slightly lower temperature. So you keep on having to freeze at lower and lower temperatures the more that you're making your ice cream. So it's really interesting. It's brilliant.
That's where I've been going wrong with my ice creams.
There we go.
When you were training at Star City, what kind of proportion was there for Mir training or Soyuz training? Which did you have to train most for?
So Soyuz training was a lot of simulator work. So we learned, because you have to learn about the spacecraft, both Soyuz and the space station. And the space station is bigger. There's more to it. There's also more space. So they pack a lot of systems into Soyuz. But then the actual sort of, if you like, the actual use of it, of the infrastructure, probably we spent more time learning about Soyuz. Because we're actually operating that more. But then in terms of actually using the spacecraft for our work, I had to do a lot of work on, say, preparation for experiments, which were done on the space station, not on Soyuz. So it was probably in the end 50-50 altogether. It's difficult to say, really, because there's say experiments only happened up there. But a lot of time is focused on Soyuz, yes, which is... and we're glad. We're glad we know how it works.
Were you a little bit annoyed when Mike Foale crashed your beloved Mir?
Can't say that.
No, it wasn't Mike's fault. But yes, it's that was of course that was a big concern, that how the astronauts, the cosmonauts, seemed to be being pushed by mission control to accept a docking when they really couldn't see how it was going to work. See both physically and also understand is they just had no control of that docking. So I think mission control learned a lesson there. They can't just will something to happen. If the cosmonauts are saying we cannot control this thing, then you don't take chances with that. But yeah, it's it was a sort of a tough time. I think the Soviet Union was going through an interesting time. Then was Russia by then, and working out how to manage its own operations in a different way than it happened with the Soviet Space Agency. But yeah, no, Mike, I don't blame you at all.
Okay, no hard feelings.
Yeah, no, I remember him. He was saying that the. Whenever he goes to Russia, that they're always blaming him, and it's just like, well, wasn't I the person that saved it? I also, that's very funny.
Well, so the typical sort of Russian thing, they try and sort of say that it was unlucky because there were foreigners on board, or unlucky because there were women on board, or unlucky for some other reason that could possibly be their own infrastructure. But yeah, I mean, it's space infrastructure. Russian stuff is very reliable. It's great. Really, not nothing to say wrong with it. It's of course, it's all human error in the end. It's how we operate it. I think the Russian Space Agency learnt a lot from that.
They did.
It's not happened since.
So I have a final question about where can our listeners go to get the best information about space? Obviously, there's certain, there's BBC, etc. But is there anyone that you follow online, or any websites that you can recommend that people can be inspired about learning more?
So personally, apart from the British Interplanetary Society,
of course,
which is fabulous,
of course,
I use NASA and ESA a lot. Now, there's a lot of what you could say propaganda, especially with NASA. So in that respect, ESA's quite good. But use a combination. And there's some other sort of just spacenews.com is really good as well. So you get quite a lot of good detailed reporting on space news. And these are all personal recommendations. I'm nothing professional about this whatsoever. This is what I happen to use. I would always recommend just the usual thing is you Google a variety of different sources. And you make sure that you're thinking through as you're reading it, so that you're asking the right questions. Is this really a decent reporter? Have I got? Is it some? Can I rely on the information that's coming out of there?
Yeah.
But actually, the science journals. So if you're really interested in a particular area of science, then some of NASA's papers are very, very good, and they have everything is just released. So it's all public information. It's all free, and you can drill down and get some really, really detailed information. So if you're interested in the real detail, definitely NASA's the.
Do you know what the NASA Journal website is? Is it? Can you get through via just NASA?
Just NASA.
Just
yeah,
NASA.
Just go straight in. You just keep on going through, just doing NASA searches, and you can quite quickly get to some detailed scientific journals and read the whole paper.
Yeah,
and it's great.
Yeah, there we go. There's your homework.
And I have to say, the one thing I've learned doing this podcast is if you go to a news article and find what people are saying about a subject and go to the original scientific paper, it's almost like they're they almost seem completely disconnected. They've managed to find the very bit, well, normally aliens, of course. I totally concur with that. That if you want to go back to the original source material, it's a fantastic place.
My Auntie Rini, bless her, she gets all of the papers in the morning, and she reads them all. And because I remember saying to her, "Why'd you buy The Sun? That's terrible. Why'd you buy that?" And she said, "Because I want to know what people are reading and what it means to them." And so it's really interesting that she knows, so she knows where all the stories come from and where the bias leads, and it's an interesting thing.
Very good. I think there's many people in marketing, and I know certainly the managing director of Mars Confectionery, when I was working there back in the 80s, he would read all the newspapers in just the same way as your auntie.
Yeah.
And for exactly that reason, you need to know how the information is being put across in different ways to different people.
Right.
I just find it very interesting. I don't have time, sadly, to read all of everything.
Same.
But it's lovely, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But yes, when you actually see how one story can be so differently reported, it does make you realise. And I think if you knowingly buy a newspaper with a certain slant, then that's fine. You understand that slant, and it might be pandering towards your own political beliefs, but as long as you understand that, that's okay.
Yeah.
I think where the danger is where it's not obvious, actually. I'd much rather have something that's absolutely in my face. This is the slant we're coming from. This is the editorial angle. And then I know I can filter it in my own mind.
Yeah. Good to do some research on that. Fantastic.
That's really good advice. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks so much for coming down. We've been wanting to do this for years, and so to make it happen is a real pleasure. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure entirely. And if people would like me to come back, then I would be more than happy.
We would love.
Be more than happy.
We would love that. We would love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Interplanetary podcast is alive!
Incredible stuff.
Jamie, I've got some space facts for you.
You know I want some.
Do you want some space facts?
Hit me.
There was a paper. I didn't see it when it came out at the time, but it relates to our story. Icy moons, Europa and Enceladus. We were arguing which one was the better one, right?
Oh yeah.
But there's a paper by Manasvi Lingam and Abraham Loeb. Came out last May, and they were looking at whether there was enough elements in the water.
Right.
Bioessential elements, and the paper's called "Is Extraterrestrial Life Suppressed on Subsurface Ocean Worlds Due to the Paucity of Bioessential Elements?"
Sounds like my kind of paper.
The conclusion is that actually it's looking not that great in terms of the way that phosphorus and molybdenum in particular, phosphorus for sub-ocean worlds, where they're sort of looking at how the phosphorus comes in, the inflow known as the source and the outflow known as the sink of that particular element, and whether there's going to be enough of it. So they've been studying it and trying to work out whether you were going to have a good enough environment for complicated life to form.
Well, that's a shame to hear, but we still can't surely know enough yet to completely rule it out.
Yeah, it doesn't rule out life at all. In fact, all it's saying is maybe if there was life, it will be this life called oligotrophic. So oligotrophic is an organism that metabolizes really, really slowly, and they have a very low population density. So that might be a problem if you land on Enceladus and you're trying to look for this life and it's really sparse, and you just don't find it the first time and just think you haven't found it when it's there. So it's worth knowing these things, because at least you're thinking, that's not the end there anyway.
Yeah, you're going to just have to look. You're going to have to look harder.
And they're saying this shouldn't be construed as grounds for ruling out future missions to the subsurface world.
Definitely not. They just need one of those radars like the Predator had. The heat-seeking ones. That's it.
They say that all they're doing is offering a hypothesis that is falsifiable and testable, that therefore it's actually, if anything, encouraging us to go to Enceladus and Europa.
Well, let me ask you this, Matt. Which one would be better?
Which one would be better? This is where you get the points, Jamie.
Yes.
I'm a little bit jealous. So this is how they finish the report. Insofar the availability of phosphorus is concerned, they recommend that Europa ought to be assigned a higher priority compared to Enceladus.
Back of the net.
Kaboo!
That is a goal for Team Europa. Get in. Well, I love that. Matt, where can I read that paper?
But I'll put a link in the show notes. It's it's an interesting paper, and very, very pertinent. It also talks about the lack of molybdenum, perhaps, in the Venus atmosphere that might mean that you won't find biological life in the Venus atmosphere.
Oh,
like some propose.
Well, I for one love that, and I'm going to read that paper. So here's the biggest question of the week, Matt. If you like the Interplanetary podcast, is there anywhere you can go to get more information?
You can go to interplanetary.org.uk. That's interplanetary.org.uk. And now you can listen to us on Spotify.
What? We're on Spotify. We are on Spotify.
We are on Spotify. Not just our playlist, but the podcast itself.
Bloody hell. How did that happen?
That's cool, isn't it?
I don't know,
it just happened.
Well, we'd like to thank Spotify for supporting us. They're not paying us, don't worry. And I would love to invite you to maybe share a link with a loved one. Open them up to the joys of space.
Right, and don't forget, we still have the competition running. We've had some letters from listeners trying to win the Interplanetary podcast mug, which I shall make a special edition of now because, for example, Paul Hilton sent in an email with loads of stuff about Luna 1. But unfortunately, the picture that he found was Mistilats of the mountain station of the main astronomical observatory of the Academy of Science in the USSR.
That's right.
Not Morris Allen. So
we're still waiting.
Yeah, we're looking. So what we're looking for is the press photograph that was stamped the Kemsley newspaper.
Here's the thing, Matt.
Yeah.
I think that this photo, just like life on Europa, is there. It's just going to take some time.
It's really
needle in a haystack. You can do it, people, though. I believe in you.
Yeah, so look out for it. It's Kemsley newspaper, January 1959. A photograph by Morris Allen of the Luna 1 sodium gas cloud.
There we go. So listen, before we leave you, we would like to once again thank our wonderful guest, Helen Sharman, the one and only. And hopefully you enjoyed that and we can do another one soon.
We got like 2 or 3 more amazing guests coming up, haven't we?
Oh, we actually have. It's going to be a good year. But Matt, if you wanted to support us in any way, because we don't have adverts on our show, how can you do it?
You can go to patreon.com/interplanetary or go from the link from interplanetary.org.uk. It's all in the show notes, Jamie. It's all dans le note de le show.
Check it out. Well, have a good weekend, everyone. And don't forget, we're not alone.
Or maybe we are. There's another paper that suggests that we are.
Dun, dun, dun.
I'll put a link to that as well in the show notes. Bye-bye, Spodcats.
Goodbye.